Our reading this morning is from the Harlem Renaissance poet Esther Popel, and I dedicate it to all those dear departed whose names we've spoken this morning or have held in loving silence in our hearts. This is called October Prayer. Change me, O God, into a tree in autumn, and let my dying be a blaze of glory. Drape me in a crimson leafy gown, and deck my soul in dancing flakes of gold. And then when death comes by and with his hands strips off my rustling garment, let me stand before him proud and naked, unashamed, uncaring, all the strength in me revealed against the sky. O God, make me an autumn tree, if I must die. Several years ago, my last surviving grandparent, my Grandma Harriet, my mom's mom, died at the age of 90. My son, Nico, was just 5 when she died. She was the only great-grandparent Nico ever knew. And I'm so grateful that during the first 5 years of his life, he was able to develop a close relationship with her. Though she was growing frail, they loved to play cards and board games together, watch cartoons, and read books. Nico called his great-grandmother Old Gigi. I'm never quite sure how she felt about that. But you see, he calls one of his grandmothers Gigi, so I guess he figured it was logical to call his great-grandmother Old Gigi. Hi, Old Gigi, he'd call out. I love you, Old Gigi. We scattered my grandmother's ashes in a country cemetery not far from where she grew up in upstate New York. It was a sunny, warm day in May. The minister said a few words. The few of us gathered round sang Amazing Grace. My mother and aunt held each other and wept silently. Nico clung to my leg during the entire service and wide-eyed took in the whole scene. The grown-ups singing through their tears, the photo of old Gigi on the program cover, and the urn that contained her ashes. When the graveside service ended, Nico pointed to the urn and asked me, "Papa, is that old Gigi?" And I said, "Well, it's not her exactly, honey. Old Gigi's soul is with God now, but yes, what remains of her body is in that urn. And now we're going to take what's left of her and give her back to Mother Earth. That way, old Gigi's body can help the plants and flowers grow, and someday she'll be part of the plants and trees." Nico looked at me perplexed and said, "Old Gigi's going to be a tree?" "Well, her ashes will help the trees grow, and yes, she'll become a part of the trees and the flowers and the earth again," I tried to explain. Nico fell silent as we scattered my grandmother's ashes, and we didn't discuss the topic any further. 2 days later, we were back home in D.C. walking to school in the morning when Nico blurted out, "Papa, there's a dead person." Honey, what do you mean? What dead person? Right there, he said, "That tree. You said trees are dead people." I looked around anxiously to see if anyone on the street was observing this conversation. For the rest of the walk to school, Nico kept pointing to trees and saying, "There's a dead person. Oh, there's another one." And in retrospect, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that my then 5-year-old took my explanation of death and rebirth so literally, right? That's what 5-year-olds do. And I briefly considered whether I should try to, nuance it a little bit for him. But I thought better of it. Because for my son to imagine the scattered ashes of his great-grandmother as nourishing the soil, just as her memory will forever nourish him, and for him to imagine that she will live on in the trees just as she will surely live on in his heart, well, that's actually not a bad theology of death for a 5-year-old, or anyone for that matter. Change me, O God, into a tree in autumn, and let my dying be a blaze of glory. O God, make me an autumn tree if I must die. One of the great privileges of being a minister is the opportunity to accompany people as they comfort and wrestle with the reality of death and loss. Whether sitting at the hospital bedside, or hugging a grieving widow, or being there for someone who's received a difficult diagnosis. These moments are almost always filled with sorrow and joy, fear and gratitude, faith and mystery. And what I've discovered over my career, what has surprised me the most, perhaps, is how death almost always finds a way to point us back to life and to the living. I hold it as a kind of miracle, really, that through our encounters with death, we often, not always, but often, find ourselves able to embrace life again and more fully, to live with a deeper gratitude for life's preciousness. The late Unitarian minister Forrest Church was one of the great theologians of life and death. Forrest had a simple definition of religion. He said, "Religion is our human response to the dual reality of living and having to die." Let me say it again. Religion is our human response to the dual reality of living and having to die. In other words, religion is how we make sense of our life in light of our death. Forrest himself was marked by death from an early age. When he was a young boy, his father nearly died of cancer. The family was racked with fear, but when his dad survived the cancer, Forrest noticed that his father had been changed. Feeling as if he'd been given a new lease on life, Forrest's dad, Frank Church, threw himself into a life of public service. He quit his job and sold the family house to finance a long-shot bid for the U.S. Senate from Idaho. Frank Church was a liberal icon of the Senate, a vocal opponent of the war in Vietnam, a critic of the national security state. In 1976, he ran unsuccessfully for the Democratic nomination for president. When his son Forrest became a minister, he reflected back on what he'd learned from witnessing his parents brush with mortality. And he wrote, "Ever since my father's illness, my parents have lived on borrowed time. Life for them is not a given, but a gift. And fully aware of life's fragility, they have not been afraid to risk and give of themselves fully." In other words, death pointed them back to life. Now, this process of drawing new life out of death is not easy and doesn't happen overnight. I came across a poignant story not long ago, a story about a woman named Betty Ann. Betty Ann's husband, Carl, to whom she'd been married for 50 years, died. And on the morning after Carl's death, Betty Ann needed to get some groceries. So she put on her coat and grabbed her purse and walked out to the car. And as she had nearly every day for 50 years, she sat down in the passenger seat of the car and waited. And after waiting a half hour or so for her husband to join her, Betty Ann got out of the car, walked over to the driver's side, and drove herself to the grocery store. Some of us perhaps have found ourselves in a position not unlike Betty Ann's, where death and loss have made it feel to us like we're suspended in time, sitting, waiting on the passenger side of the car, one foot still planted in the life that was, the other not yet arrived where life is headed. There's no shame in this. A lot can happen there on the passenger side of the car. We might grieve, mourn, remember, imagine again futures that will never be, probably cry, maybe laugh. And then at some point, we find the courage to open the car door, walk around to the driver's side, and take a seat behind the wheel. Sometimes it's not so much that death points us back to life, but that we find the courage to climb out of the pit of our sorrow and take our life back, reclaim our life, and move forward again. It takes time and courage. But that's precisely what a brush with death can give us. Courage. In her memoir, The Cancer Journals, the great poet and Black lesbian feminist Audre Lorde offers us a testimony about the courage that can come in the face of death. After a breast cancer diagnosis in 1977, Lorde found herself at first consumed by fear and even shame, fear of death, shame over her illness. And these weren't new feelings for Lorde. She had confronted fear, shame, and silence previously in her life when first finding her voice as a poet when she came out of the closet in the 60s. And she thought she'd put those demons behind her, but with a cancer diagnosis, they were there again, that fear, that shame. But living through that time and beating cancer, Lord eventually came to a liberating insight. She wrote, "After we have dealt face to face with death, what is there possibly left for us to be afraid of? Once I accept dying as a part of life," she continued, "who can ever have power over me again?" Death pointed Lord back to life in a powerful and liberating way. Or rather, she reclaimed her life from death in a powerful and liberating way. Her journals are testimony to the freedom we can experience when we do, in fact, come to terms with our mortality. I know that some of you know that freedom too. I know that some of you have been through that struggle. I know that I want to live with that sense of freedom, that sense of fearlessness. I think the world will demand of us all that we live with that sense of freedom and that sense of fearlessness. Death, point us back to life. I want to close this morning by offering one final story. I find that stories are the best way to talk about death because otherwise words don't really work very well. A colleague of mine once described a curious incident she witnessed a while back in Grand Central Terminal in New York City. Now picture Grand Central back before the pandemic at the height of morning rush hour. The platforms are crowded, people are pressing in on each other, trains coming and going in every direction. And in the middle of it all, a train pulls into the station, and a woman steps off onto the platform. Just as she does, she realizes that she is holding in her hand just one of her beautiful red leather gloves. And looking back into the train car where she came from, she sees the matching one on the seat where she'd left it. But now it's too late. The train doors are about to close. And the woman looks down at the glove in her hand, and with a shrug, she throws it right into the train's car just before the doors close, right next to the one that she'd left behind. The train leaves the station, and the woman walks away. I love that story. You know, we can be consumed by regret over what we've lost, or consumed by fear for what we might one day lose, whether it's an election or our lives. Or we can give ourselves fully to life and live it with abandon. That's the word that came to my mind when I first heard that story, when I imagined the woman throwing her glove back onto the train. Abandon, right? The word suggests both an exuberant zeal for life and a kind of relinquishment, a letting go, as if the two somehow go hand in hand. Because they do. Right? When we become more comfortable with the fact that we will one day relinquish our lives, then we can live them freely and lovingly. Friends, let's not leave this earth clinging to that one useless glove. Let's give life everything we've got. Let's live generously, love fiercely. Let's learn to live with abandon before the train leaves the station. Amen. Friends, let's continue our worship by joining together in our closing hymn. Let the life I've lived speak for me. The words are printed in your order of worship. Please rise in body or in spirit. Let's sing together. Grateful for those whose lives have blessed us. Hopeful for the legacy that we build every day and will one day leave behind. Let us go in peace and live with abandon and return in love. Amen.
Will you please join me in our chalice extinguishing words? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
To